This short extract is from the 19th century text, A Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And in this extract, the narrator is clearly horrified at what he sees. Now, the question asks, how has the writer used language to describe the fear or shock that the narrator feels? So guys, let's have a look then at the extract step by step to see how the writer has used language to describe the narrator's fear. Now, firstly, right, the writer says, I had sprung to my feet and leaped back against the wall, my arms raised to shield me from that prodigy, my mind submerged in terror. If you see, right at the beginning of the extract, we have numerous verbs, and these verbs are quite emotive, quite action-orientated verbs. You can see it's sort of a frenzied kind of action. Sprung, leaped back, raised to shield me, submerged in terror. Now, these are examples of emotive verbs, emotive language, okay? And this would depict the frenzied, sudden actions of the narrator. He's obviously feeling really scared, right? They are quick movements, and he's trying to protect himself from the danger that he sees, suggesting clearly that he is in fact scared, he's fearful, he's terrified. Okay, so that is one example of language or linguistic devices. Let's go on to the next one. Here, as you can clearly see, oh God, I screamed, and oh God again. Now, this is an example, firstly, of repetition. Okay, it is emphasizing again his disbelief, his shock, right? But here we also see that there are visual adjectives being used: pale, shaken, okay, suggesting that the sight that lay before him was quite something out of the ordinary, right? It was a horrifying sight. It was a sight that the narrator had never witnessed before, and this left him speechless. As we can see, he just says, oh God, and he repeated, oh God. So these guys here are your visual adjectives that we need to always name the linguistic device, remember, when you're explaining. Then, of course, let's go on to the repetition of the exclamatives here. Right? Oh God is an exclamative. He shouts out. He screams. It's a short little exclamative, but really, really powerful, because again, it illustrates and demonstrates his shock, his disbelief, his terror, the horror that he feels, the fear that he feels at the sight of the transformation of Henry Jekyll. Okay? And another example, guys, are these dynamic verbs that the writer has used. For example, fainting, groping. Okay? Here, the dynamic verbs are your verbs ending in ing, showing some sort of continuous movement and action and frenzy and frantic sort of, action. And it's suggesting, of course, that Henry Jekyll looks really, really dreadful, really scary, right? And this has terrified the narrator. And then let's go on to the next slide, because we're going to move on to the sibilants here. Let's have a look at the sibilants. And of course, the simile as well. Let's look at the sibilants first. The sibilants, my soul sickened at it. The repetition of the S sound here, reinforcing his disbelief, right? Reinforcing the horror, reinforcing the terror that he feels and how petrified he was at this horrific sight. And then we have the simile, like a man restored from death, as you can see right here, showing that he was almost like a zombie. He looked like a zombie. It illustrates the shock at the discovery of this horrible, almost gruesome sight, I would say. It was unnatural because being restored from death is an unnatural occurrence. It doesn't happen every day. It's unnatural. It's quite alarming. And this is what has clearly shocked the narrator. Okay, guys. So we've already spoken about, the exclamative and the repetition of the exclamative. The next bit that I want to go on to, guys, is the question on how is the writer use structure in this extract to engage and interest the reader. Now, there are several structural devices, but in this particular extract, okay, we have, and if I go back, we have the beginning. Now, right at the beginning, we can see that the narrator is very, very emotionally sort of invested in what he sees, because it made him spring to his feet and leap backwards because he was terrified. So here we can see the focus is on the narrator's feelings, his emotions. He was scared. And this clearly engages the reader because the reader wonders, the reader is curious. And therefore, the reader is engaged because the reader is intrigued and interested. He wants to know. We want to know, why did he spring to his feet? Why did he leap back? Why did he raise his hands to shield him? Right? What did he see? Why was he submerged in terror? All of this information right at the beginning of this extract clearly interests and engages the reader because it builds up the suspense for the reader through the focus on the narrator's emotions. So look for that. And then, of course, right here, we have these, we know that they are exclamative, but when we talk about it as a structural device, this is an outburst. It is a repetition. It's an example of repetition. And repetition is an example of your structural device. It is also dialogue. And even though he's not speaking to anyone, he's not having a conversation with anyone, he's almost having a conversation with himself, but he's clearly having an outburst, which is a repetition. And that is an example of a structural device. And this, again, really, really emphasizes the fear, emphasizes his anxiety, his agony, how very terrified he was, how shaken he was, and how much in disbelief he was, how much, he was shocked by what he sees, right? Then as we go on, guys, we can see that he is obviously very, very disturbed. And the fact that in the middle of the extract, the focus then changes to Henry Jekyll, who has transformed and now looking like a man restored from death. This has clearly shocked shocks the reader, and it shocks the narrator, right? But we want to talk about how the reader is engaged, so we can see that builds up the suspense, because we want to know what's going on. Why has he changed? Why does he look so very horrifying? Why does he look so very scary? Okay. And then as we move on, guys, that of course again builds up the tension in the text. It builds up the suspense in the text. It is a long sentence, as you can see, so it slows down the pace of the text while building up the tension for the reader. And that builds up the suspense, so it clearly engages the reader. It clearly interests the reader, okay? But then as we go on in the text, we can see he says, what he told me in the next hour, I cannot bring my mind to set on paper. What I saw, and I heard what I heard, and my soul sickened at it. And, he goes on to say, if you move on, I don't want to reveal the answer yet, right? He goes on to say, let's look at this extract here, right? He goes on to say that he screamed, and then he says, my life is shaken to its roots. Sleep has left me. The deadliest terror sits by me at all hours. And he says that my days are numbered and I think I'm going to die. Now that clearly shocks the reader, because we can see now that the narrator has, or the writer has created a dilemma. The writer has created a problem here in these lines here, a problem. The narrator, he is so terrified that he feels that his life is going to come to an end. He feels that he's going to die. And that is clearly a dilemma. And a dilemma in any text is a structural device. And in this case, this dilemma has engaged the reader, because now we, as the reader, we realize how absolutely terrifying this particular sight and incident and experience was for the narrator. And the writer has successfully engaged the interest of the reader, because there's uncertainty now created through the dilemma at the end of this extract, which leaves the reader in suspense. So to go to how I have, written it out as some possible sample paragraphs that you might want to also, look at and see as examples. Let's have a look. In the beginning, the writer focuses the attention of the reader on the character, okay? And the transformation, the supernatural transformation clearly shocks both the narrator and the reader. An atmosphere of tension is created when a cry followed and he reeled and staggered. I've got "and" in brackets because that's not the writer's words, it's my words. But I'm embedding my quotation, which is a good thing to do. And you must remember to do this in your exams as well. And he staggered and clutched at the table. Right, so here we can see that the reader is clearly disturbed but in suspense, kept in suspense due to the uncertainty and the horror that is portrayed early in the extract. Then I say, furthermore, through the use of the long sentence, the writer slows down the pace of the text to emphasize how dreadful and agonizing the process of change was for the character, but also for the narrator who was watching it. And the narrator is clearly shocked, and this enhances the suspense for the reader. So therefore, the reader's interest is engaged. I go on to say finally that the use of the dialogue and repetition in his outburst, "Oh God," engages the reader, as we are aware of the shock and the horror that the narrator experiences when he witnesses the change in the character's appearance. The suspense and the tension builds up and escalates through the repetition of "Oh God," and this interests the reader further. And of course, you can also talk about the dilemma. The dilemma comes from the fact that the narrator actually feels that he is going to die, that he is so upset by the whole experience, and the writer has, created the dilemma to engage the reader. This is one possible sample answer for the language question and the structure question based on this particular extract from A Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I hope that you found this lesson useful. Thank you, guys.